History often overlooks the quiet power of everyday people. This journey uncovers how farmers, artisans, and common citizens sparked revolutions that toppled empires. You will learn the forgotten strategies that turned ordinary voices into extraordinary forces for change. How did a single broken pot become a symbol of defiance? What secret networks allowed dissent to spread undetected? Where do you see the potential for change in your own community? A single potter stares at the shattered pieces of his work, the clay vessel broken not by his own hand, but by the weight of a tax he could never hope to pay. This fracture in his daily life mirrors a deeper crack in the foundation of his society. The initial spark for revolution is rarely a lightning bolt from the sky. It is more often the slow, steady heat of everyday grievances coming to a boil. Economic hardship, like that potter facing ruin, is one such powerful catalyst. So too is the quiet humiliation of social injustice, or the smothering feeling of cultural suppression. Historical records from countless eras reveal a consistent pattern. Grand political upheavals do not begin with grand political speeches. They start in the home, in the marketplace, and in the field, with shared frustrations over the simple struggle to live with dignity. Consider the bread riots that erupted in various societies long before any official revolution was declared. On the surface, these were protests about the price of grain and the emptiness of stomachs. But they were about so much more. They were a collective scream against a system that denied people their basic rights and their self-respect. A person might tolerate hunger in silence, but when an entire community reaches its breaking point, that hunger transforms into a powerful demand for change. These small, collective actions are the true foundation of every great movement. A village secretly agreeing to withhold an unfair tax. Artisans organizing a local gathering to air their shared complaints. These are not the dramatic final acts of a revolution, but its essential first steps. They are the quiet whispers of dissent that, when joined together, slowly build into an unstoppable chorus. That broken pot, a symbol of immediate hardship, needed a voice that could carry across generations, long before the written word could be trusted, or when it was forbidden to the common person. People turned to the oldest technology of all, the spoken story. In the flickering light of a village fire, elders would recount tales of legendary heroes who stood against giants. To the authorities listening in, these were just harmless fables for children. But for the villagers, the giant was not a mythical beast. It was their oppressive landlord, and the hero's clever victory was a blueprint for their own resistance. These stories became a living archive, a way to preserve a people's true history and their deepest values outside of official, and often misleading, records. The rhythm of a work song sung in a field could do more than ease the labor. It could secretly coordinate a protest or mock a foolish nobleman without his ever knowing. Folklore and ballads carried coded messages about meeting places, safe houses, and planned actions, all hidden in plain sight. This collective storytelling wove a powerful, invisible fabric of solidarity. It reminded everyone that they were part of something larger than their individual suffering, a community with a shared past and a common enemy. This shared identity, nurtured by narrative, was the essential fuel for any organized movement. But how did these stories of defiance travel from one isolated village to the next, weaving a wider web of dissent? That journey relied on a different kind of power, moving silently along hidden pathways. These hidden stories and coded songs needed a physical pathway to travel, a way to connect one village's quiet defiance with the next. This is where the second powerful strategy emerged, the silent construction of covert networks and underground alliances. Think of the ancient trader, his cart laden with spices and cloth, moving freely between towns under the watchful eyes of guards. What those guards did not see were the tiny, folded messages tucked into the hem of his cloak or whispered between transactions. He was more than a merchant. He was a vital link in a chain of dissent, connecting isolated communities and transforming their individual grievances into a unified front. Ordinary people built these hidden alliances using the structures they already had. Artisan guilds, formed to protect trade secrets and set fair prices, became perfect covers for organizing protests. Religious gatherings, permitted for worship, provided a safe space to discuss plans under the guise of spiritual fellowship. Even extended family ties created a web of trust that could stretch across great distances because blood relations were less likely to betray one another. Historical records from various oppressive empires reveal how these networks operated entirely on trust and shared risk. A single informant could doom an entire cell, so members developed intricate systems to protect themselves. They used subtle symbols, like a specific pattern woven into a basket left on a doorstep, to signal that a meeting was safe. They created complex passwords that sounded like ordinary greetings to an outsider, but confirmed a shared purpose to an ally. This underground structure was the revolution's nervous system. It allowed for the coordination of a protest in one city and a simultaneous work stoppage in another, creating the illusion of a spontaneous, widespread uprising. It enabled the distribution of crucial resources like food for the families of those who had been imprisoned for speaking out, ensuring the community remained strong. The planning of strategic actions, from blocking a key road to publishing a forbidden pamphlet, all relied on this ability to operate in the shadows. The success of countless movements hinged on this simple, profound truth, that unity forged in secret could eventually challenge power in the open. But how did these networks, spread across vast distances, manage to communicate their complex plans without their messages being intercepted? A silent loom speaks volumes when an entire town's weavers walk away at once. Their collective action transformed a simple work stoppage into a powerful public symbol, a visual cry against exploitation that everyone could understand. This is the third strategy, the deliberate use of symbolic acts and public demonstrations to amplify a message. When direct speech is too dangerous, symbols become the language of the unheard. A specific color worn by thousands on the same day, a simple flower pinned to a coat, or a silent human chain encircling a government building, these gestures conveyed unity and resolve without a single shouted word. They turned abstract grievances into something tangible and shared. Historians point to the liberty trees planted during various uprisings as a perfect example. A tree is a living, growing thing. To plant one in a public square was not just an act of defiance, it was an act of hope. It visually represented a community putting down roots for a new future, a promise of freedom that would, with care and struggle, grow strong over time. This symbolic power resonated deeply with the ordinary person, making a complex political idea feel immediate and personal. It was their tree, representing their collective will. These demonstrations were masterclasses in public communication. A peaceful march of mothers holding photographs of their missing children carries a moral weight that armed soldiers often cannot counter. The creation of art, like satirical cartoons mocking a corrupt official or poignant murals painted on a public wall, bypassed official censorship and spoke directly to the heart. These acts built momentum not through force but through persuasion. They attracted broader support from those who were hesitant or on the sidelines because the message was clear, dignified, and universally understandable. A single weaver on strike is a labor dispute. An entire guild of weavers standing silently together in the town square becomes a movement. Their shared sacrifice and visible solidarity turned individual hardship into a collective demand for justice, proving that the most powerful weapon could sometimes be a symbol that everyone was willing to stand behind. The scribe's hand aches under the flickering candlelight, copying words that could get him killed. This secret work of creating and distributing revolutionary literature turned abstract ideas into tangible weapons. Pamphlets and handbills became the lifeblood of a movement, carrying concise arguments and urgent calls to action directly into the hands of ordinary people. When public speech was forbidden, the written word passed through trusted channels became a powerful voice for the voiceless. These documents served a dual purpose. For those who could read, they translated complex political theories into the plain language of the street, explaining rights and injustices in terms any farmer or artisan could grasp. For the many who were illiterate, these pamphlets were not useless scraps of paper. They were read aloud in taverns, in market squares, and in hidden cellar meetings, their words amplified by a single voice to become a shared experience for dozens. This act of public reading transformed private knowledge into public discourse, uniting a community around a common understanding of their plight and their potential. History is filled with pamphlet wars that laid the groundwork for massive change. These short, sharply written critiques exposed the corruption and excess of the ruling class in damning detail. They did more than just complain. They often proposed clear, compelling alternatives, painting a vivid picture of a fairer world that felt within reach. This fueled everyday conversations, turning quiet resentment into organized public opinion. The risks these scribes and distributors faced were immense. Discovery meant imprisonment, exile, or worse. Yet they persisted, operating secret presses and developing intricate distribution networks that mirrored the covert alliances we discussed earlier. A pamphlet left on a bench, slipped into a loaf of bread, or tucked inside a purchased pot became a silent spark for rebellion. This dangerous work democratized knowledge in the most profound way. It took information that was once the exclusive property of the elite and gave it to the common person, empowering them with the ideas needed to challenge the status quo. An informed populace is a mobilized populace, ready to move from discussion to decisive action. This foundation of shared knowledge and unified purpose was absolutely essential for the next, more tangible phase of resistance, one that would target the very economic pillars upholding the powerful. A single shopkeeper's decision to stop selling a certain tea could ripple outward until an entire coastline refused to unload a single crate. This was the power of the fifth strategy: economic boycotts and grassroots financial resistance. When physical confrontation was too costly, ordinary people discovered they could wield their collective purchasing power as a peaceful but potent weapon. In colonial settings where imported goods symbolized control, the simple act of refusing to buy them became a profound assertion of independence. A community weaving its own cloth instead of purchasing it from a distant monopoly was not just saving money, it was spinning the very fabric of its own identity and self-reliance. These movements rarely began as grand, organized campaigns. They started with a local agreement among neighbors, a pact between merchants to stop stocking a taxed item, or a pledge within households to make do without a luxury that funded their oppression. A town that collectively decided to brew its own herbal teas instead of buying the heavily taxed imported variety was making a quiet but unified political statement. This grassroots solidarity could not be easily quashed by soldiers or laws because it was rooted in the daily choices of thousands of individuals. Historical experts point to boycotts targeting powerful monopolies as particularly effective. When a single company held a stranglehold on an essential good, a widespread refusal to purchase it could bring that corporate giant to its knees. The loss of revenue created immense pressure, often forcing concessions that years of pleading had failed to achieve. These actions revealed a fundamental truth that the powerful often forgot, that their wealth was entirely dependent on the cooperation of the common people. The success of these efforts hinged on financial solidarity. Communities developed their own alternative currencies or created local barter networks to circumvent the official economy controlled by their rulers. They established cooperative stores and credit unions, building a parallel financial system that answered to them alone. This was not just about protest, it was about building a new foundation for society from the ground up. By pooling their resources and directing their collective economic energy, ordinary people demonstrated that money could be a tool for liberation. This economic leverage forced rulers to the negotiating table, proving that the clink of a coin withheld could be as powerful as the clash of a sword. How did these expressions of financial defiance then transform into the enduring cultural identities that outlasted any single ruler or regime? A street performer's comical impression of a pompous official draws roaring laughter from a crowded square. In that shared moment of mirth, a powerful act of resistance was taking place. Cultural expressions like music, art, and theater became a brilliant vehicle for dissent, a way to voice sharp criticism and envision a better future while avoiding the blade of direct confrontation. A folk song about a clever fox outwitting a hunter was not merely a children's tune, it was a thinly veiled celebration of the common person's wit triumphing over brutal authority. Everyone humming that melody was participating in a silent protest, their voices weaving a tapestry of shared defiance. Painters would create idyllic landscapes of a society free from oppression, their canvases serving as visual blueprints for the world they hoped to build. These were not just pretty pictures, they were powerful statements of intent, a collective dream made visible for all to see. Theater was particularly potent. A traveling troupe's play, filled with slapstick and satire, could mock the greed and incompetence of the ruling class right under their noses. The rulers, often eager to be seen as patrons of the arts, would sometimes even attend these performances, completely missing the fact that they were the butt of the joke. This use of humor was a masterstroke. It disarmed the powerful, united the audience in a shared sense of superiority, and made the heavy burden of oppression feel momentarily lighter. More importantly, it fostered a crucial sense of identity and resilience. Singing the same songs and laughing at the same jokes reminded people that they were part of a community with a shared enemy and a shared hope. This cultural glue was vital for sustaining movements over the long, difficult years, providing emotional fuel when physical energy was low. Experts who study these movements point out that these artistic expressions did more than just sustain morale. They actively educated and mobilized. A poignant mural painted on a public wall could illustrate the stark contrast between the lives of the rich and the struggles of the poor more effectively than any political pamphlet. It spoke a universal language that bypassed the need for literacy, striking a direct emotional chord. These cultural artifacts inspired immense courage. To create them was an act of bravery, and to celebrate them was an act of solidarity. They turned everyday entertainment into a profound education in justice, preparing the communal heart and mind for the challenges ahead. This deep, culturally rooted sense of purpose often found its most enduring strength in something even more profound, a shared spiritual conviction that their cause was righteous. A humble preacher's voice echoes not from a grand cathedral, but from a simple town square, speaking of a divine justice that favors the poor and oppressed. In societies where the ruling class claimed a monopoly on spiritual truth, These grassroots interpretations of faith became a revolutionary act. Ordinary people discovered that their deepest spiritual beliefs could provide both the moral justification and the practical framework for challenging earthly powers. They did not reject religion, they reclaimed it, reading sacred texts through the lens of their own suffering and finding within them a powerful mandate for liberation. Throughout history, we see revolts where commoners, armed with nothing but their conviction, stood before kings and declared that their divine right to rule was forfeit because it violated a higher, sacred law. This was not merely a political argument, it was a profound shift in spiritual authority, moving it from the institution to the individual conscience. Faith provided an unshakable moral high ground. How could a ruler argue against a movement that claimed its authority came directly from God? This spiritual dimension infused the struggle with a sense of purpose that transcended immediate suffering. The promise of divine reward or the belief that they were instruments of a sacred will give people the courage to face imprisonment, violence, and even death with a resilience that purely political movements often struggled to muster. The organizational power of spiritual communities was equally vital. Weekly gatherings for worship offered a perfect and perfectly legal cover for strategic planning. The pilgrimage, a journey sanctioned by the state, could secretly function as a massive coordination meeting, bringing leaders from distant regions together under the guise of religious devotion. Communal prayers and hymns reinforced a powerful sense of unity and shared destiny, binding people together in a sacred covenant that felt stronger than any temporary defeat. This spiritual framework built a remarkable cohesion. It reminded every participant that they were part of a cosmic struggle between justice and oppression, making their personal sacrifices feel meaningful and holy. The preacher's sermon on equality was not just a comforting idea, it was a direct challenge to the very foundations of a hierarchical society. By mobilizing through faith, ordinary people tapped into a source of strength that their oppressors could not easily corrupt or crush, proving that the most potent revolutions are often those fought with the soul as their primary weapon. This deeply rooted sense of purpose, however, needed to be coupled with practical knowledge to sustain a lasting transformation. A child's first lesson might not be in reading or numbers, but in remembering. In the dim light of a hidden cellar, an elder points to a woven tapestry, recounting the true story of a broken treaty, a story no official textbook would ever tell. This was the eighth powerful strategy, the establishment of informal education and knowledge sharing. When authorities control the schools, they control the accepted version of history and the limits of what is possible to imagine. Ordinary people responded by creating their own classrooms, transforming living rooms, barns, and secluded forest clearings into sanctuaries of forbidden knowledge. The curriculum in these secret schools was a direct act of rebellion. Children learned their native language, which the state had tried to ban. They memorized poems that celebrated past heroes of resistance and sang songs that encoded maps of safe passage through the mountains. This was not just about preserving a fading culture, it was about actively weaponizing memory. It ensured that the flame of defiance and the reasons for it would be passed directly to the next generation, creating a living chain of purpose that no single arrest could ever break. Historical records from various oppressed societies show these hidden schools were far more than cultural repositories. They were incubators for future strategy. A mathematics lesson could secretly involve calculating the supplies needed for a long protest. A discussion of ethics and justice would naturally evolve into a planning session for a future nonviolent action. The elders teaching were not merely nostalgic grandparents, they were seasoned strategists training their replacements. They identified the most promising young minds and nurtured their critical thinking, teaching them to question every official decree and to see the hidden structures of power. This knowledge created a foundation for sustained resistance that could outlast any single leader or uprising. An educated populace understands its rights and can articulate its grievances with clarity and force. It can develop complex, long-term plans for change because it possesses the historical context to know what has been tried before and what might work next. By taking control of education, ordinary people were not just fighting for the present, they were building the intellectual architecture for their future freedom. This revolutionary act of teaching ensured that even in the darkest of times, the seeds of a better world were being carefully sown and nurtured, a testament to the quiet, enduring power of a story told and a lesson remembered. A woman selling vegetables in a bustling market square seems like the most ordinary of figures, yet her basket holds more than just produce. Tucked beneath the onions is a coded list of safe houses, and her casual chatter with customers is a careful exchange of vital intelligence. While history books often celebrate the men who gave public speeches or led charges, the quiet, relentless work of women formed the very backbone of countless revolutionary movements. Their participation was not a minor footnote, it was a masterclass in strategic ingenuity, often leveraging their societal invisibility to operate in plain sight. In patriarchal societies that underestimated their political awareness, women became the revolution's unseen architects. They organized the boycotts we discussed earlier, rallying entire neighborhoods to refuse certain goods. They ran the covert communication networks, using their freedom to move through public spaces to pass messages without suspicion. When a dissident was wounded, it was often women who provided clandestine medical care in their own homes, transforming private kitchens into emergency field hospitals. Historical cases reveal the sheer breadth of their contributions. There are records of women-led protests over food shortages, where hundreds of mothers and daughters marched not with weapons, but with empty pots and pans, creating a deafening public reminder of their families' hunger. Their demands were immediate and moral, making them incredibly difficult for authorities to dismiss. In other instances, women used their roles as seamstresses, laundresses, and even servants within the homes of the powerful to gather priceless information. They overheard troop movements and political plans, then wove that intelligence into the patterns of embroidery or passed it along in a bundle of freshly washed linens. This perceived conventionality was their greatest camouflage. A group of soldiers would rarely suspect a circle of women knitting in a public square, yet their clicking needles could be timing the patrols of the guards, and the colored yarn could be mapping out the locations of checkpoints. Experts who study these movements confirm that this unique position allowed women to become key strategists. They saw problems and devised solutions that others missed. A woman might establish an entire network of safe houses by appealing to the shared responsibility of protecting children and community, an argument that resonated across class and political lines. They brought unique perspectives, prioritizing the protection of families and the maintenance of community morale, which were essential for long-term survival. Their involvement fundamentally strengthened the cause, injecting resilience and a practical focus on the human cost of conflict. By recognizing the crucial agency of these women, we see a more complete picture of how revolutions were not just fought, but lived and sustained through daily acts of profound courage. This powerful legacy of often unseen participation finds a parallel in another dynamic force, the energy and idealism of the young. A group of adolescents gathers in a dusty attic, their faces illuminated by a single candle as they pass around a handwritten pamphlet. Their world is shaped by the stories of heroes and the injustices their parents whisper about, but their energy is entirely their own. Young people, unburdened by the caution that comes with adult responsibilities, have always been the lifeblood of revolutionary movements, taking risks that their elders could not and injecting a bold, innovative spirit into the struggle. Their idealism is not a weakness but a strategic asset, a refusal to accept a broken world as the only possible one. Student groups, often formed under the guise of literary or debating clubs, became hotbeds for circulating forbidden literature and planning protests. A network of young apprentices moving freely between workshops and market stalls could distribute subversive flyers with an efficiency that baffled the authorities. They brought with them fresh perspectives, questioning old strategies and devising new methods of communication and organization that more established leaders had never considered. The role of mentors in this process was absolutely critical. Elders and seasoned activists recognized that this raw energy needed guidance to become effective. They did not command the youth, but instead shared stories of past struggles, both the triumphs and the costly mistakes, allowing the next generation to learn from lived experience. They provided a safe space for these young minds to debate, to dream, and to develop their own plans, knowing that the ownership of an idea makes one far more committed to its success. This careful nurturing transformed impulsive anger into focused strategy, ensuring the fight for change became a shared, intergenerational project. Historians point out that involving youth did more than just provide immediate manpower for demonstrations. It secured the very longevity of the revolution's ideals. When a 15-year-old participates in a successful boycott or helps hide a fugitive intellectual, the cause becomes woven into their personal identity. They carry those values forward, becoming the teachers, the community leaders, and the parents who will pass the torch to their own children. A movement that captures the imagination of its youth is a movement that plants its roots deep, ensuring it can weather any storm. This innate dynamism of younger participants, their natural fluency with new ways of thinking and connecting, often made them the pioneers of the revolution's next vital frontier, the clever adaptation of emerging technologies to outmaneuver their opponents. A simple drumbeat echoing through a valley could sound like a routine village signal, but to a trained ear, it was a precise warning that soldiers were approaching from the east. Ordinary people, denied access to advanced weaponry, became masters of repurposing the tools they already had, turning everyday objects and established technologies into a sophisticated nervous system for their movements. This ingenuity transformed the mundane into the miraculous. A farmer's cart used for hauling grain might be fitted with a false bottom to conceal a fugitive or a bundle of forbidden pamphlets. The complex patterns woven into a traditional textile could secretly map a safe route through the mountains, with each color and symbol representing a landmark or a danger. These were not inventions born in laboratories, but adaptations born of necessity, a testament to the human capacity to innovate under pressure. The spread of affordable printing technology, for instance, was a game changer. What was once a slow, laborious process of handwriting pamphlets could now become a flood of identical, persuasive arguments, produced in secret cellars and distributed under cover of darkness. This mass production of ideas democratized knowledge on an unprecedented scale, allowing a single compelling argument to reach thousands of eyes and ears almost simultaneously. It leveled the informational playing field against rulers who controlled the official newspapers and proclamations. Historical records from various uprisings detail how these technological adaptations were crucial for evading surveillance. Messengers developed complex systems of dead drops, leaving messages under a specific rock or tucked into the hollow of a known tree, ensuring that sensitive information never had to be carried on a person who could be searched. They used simple codes based on everyday items, like the arrangement of laundry on a clothesline, to signal whether a meeting place was safe or compromised. This resourcefulness allowed dissident networks to coordinate across vast distances, orchestrating protests and distributing resources with a speed and secrecy that their better-equipped opponents struggled to counter. The true power of this strategy lay in its accessibility. It did not require rare materials or special training, only a shared commitment and a clever mind. By turning their oppressors' own tools of commerce and communication against them, ordinary people demonstrated that the most advanced technology in any conflict is often human creativity itself. This clever use of available means to organize and communicate naturally paved the way for another, more formal kind of challenge, one waged not in the shadows but within the very halls of power. A weathered parchment, carefully unrolled before a local lord, could carry the weight of 1,000 silent grievances. Ordinary people, even in the most rigid feudal systems, discovered a potent strategy hidden within the very laws meant to control them. They learned to exploit legal loopholes and petition for their long-forgotten rights. This was not an appeal to mercy, but a calculated challenge based on precedent. Imagine a community of peasants, after secretly consulting with a literate elder, presenting a formal petition. They did not beg for kindness. They calmly cited specific clauses from ancient charters or royal decrees that granted them traditional rights to pasture their animals or be free from a certain tax. By framing their demands within the ruler's own legal framework, they forced a response on his terms, making their case difficult to dismiss outright as mere rebellion. Historical records are filled with cases where villagers, facing an unjust decree from their local magistrate, would pool their resources to send an appeal to a higher, often distant, court. They were gambling that a royal official, uninterested in a local squabble, might overturn the decision simply to maintain the crown's authority or to collect a fee. This process in itself was a victory. It exposed the corruption or overreach of the local power structure, creating a public record of the injustice and rallying wider support from other communities suffering under the same lord. The success of these efforts relied on a remarkable feat of grassroots legal education. Knowledge of these old laws and charters had to be preserved and shared in secret, often through the same hidden networks we discussed earlier. Sympathetic scribes or minor officials, who themselves chafed under the system, would sometimes provide crucial counsel, explaining the precise language needed to make a petition legally admissible. By analyzing specific historical petitions, we see how they set powerful precedents. A single successful case, where a village won the right to manage its own forests, became a blueprint for a dozen other villages to follow. Each small legal victory chipped away at the foundation of absolute authority, proving that the system could be made to bend, if not yet break. This legal groundwork transformed abstract anger into a structured, justifiable list of demands, building undeniable momentum for broader reforms. It demonstrated that the path to change could sometimes be paved with parchment and ink, a quiet preparation for the economic pressures that would soon be applied. A single coin, saved from a week's wages and dropped into a communal chest, could become a shield against despair. In the shadow of oppressive lenders and unpredictable harvests, ordinary people forged their own security through mutual aid societies and economic cooperatives. These were not charities, but sophisticated systems of solidarity built from the ground up. A community of weavers might collectively purchase their raw materials in bulk, bypassing the exploitative middleman and keeping their profits within their own circle. Farmers would pool their land and labor to create a collective farm, ensuring that a bad season for one family did not mean starvation, but was instead a shared challenge for all to overcome. This was economic resistance in its most practical form, a declaration that they would no longer be at the mercy of a system designed to keep them poor and dependent. Historical records from various industrializing cities reveal mutual aid groups that functioned as a complete social safety net long before any government provided one. For a small, regular contribution, a member could receive support for medical expenses, a stipend for their family if they were injured, and even funds to cover a proper burial. These societies often ran their own schools, ensuring the children of laborers could get an education, and they maintained libraries of forbidden books, turning economic cooperation into intellectual liberation. The true brilliance of these organizations, however, lay in their internal structure. Every member had a voice in how the shared funds were used. Debates over a loan for a new loom or the support for a sick neighbor were not just financial discussions, they were masterclasses in collective decision-making and democratic practice. This process identified natural leaders, those who were fair-minded and strategic, and gave them crucial experience in managing resources and resolving conflicts. Experts who study these movements confirm that the cooperative itself became a revolutionary training ground. People who were told they had no right to govern their own lives were suddenly running a complex, self-funded organization. They were learning to budget, to plan for the future, and to negotiate with outside suppliers from a position of collective strength. This daily practice in self-governance built a powerful confidence that translated directly into political action. The same organizational skills used to manage a community grain store were later deployed to coordinate a district-wide boycott or a peaceful protest. The economic empowerment was immediate, but the political education was everlasting. By creating their own parallel economy, these communities proved that they could not only survive without their oppressors, but actually thrive. This tangible success, this lived experience of self-reliance, forged an unbreakable bond of trust and shared purpose. How did these tightly knit groups then maintain their resolve and morale through years of struggle and inevitable setback? The answer lies in the subtle psychological warfare they waged upon themselves. A whispered rumor can be as powerful as 1,000 swords. Inside a besieged city, where supplies are low and despair runs high, a story begins to circulate among the defenders. It speaks of a sign, an omen of divine favor that promises their deliverance is near. This is not a spontaneous miracle, but a deliberate act of psychological warfare, a strategy ordinary people use to turn their deepest fears into unshakable hope. They understood that the battle was not only fought with physical resources, but within the minds of everyone involved. By spreading carefully crafted disinformation, they could demoralize their attackers, making them question their own cause and sowing discord in their ranks. A simple tale of a massive rebel army marching to their aid, even if entirely fabricated, could cause an opposing force to hesitate, to second-guess their strategy, and perhaps to break their siege prematurely. Beyond confusing the enemy, the most vital psychological work was done within the community itself. Maintaining morale through years of struggle required more than just stubbornness. It demanded the active cultivation of a culture of resistance. Public rituals became essential tools for this. The celebration of a small victory, like the successful boycott of a hated merchant or the release of a captured leader, was not just a party. It was a strategic reaffirmation of their power, a communal meal shared from a single large pot, a ceremony honoring those who had been imprisoned, or the collective weaving of a banner to be carried in the next protest, all served to reinforce bonds of solidarity. These acts transformed individual suffering into a shared sacrifice, making the burden feel lighter and the goal feel closer. Historical records from prolonged conflicts show how these efforts created a powerful sense of inevitability. Songs composed about their eventual victory were not mere fantasies, they were declarations that shaped reality. By singing of a future where they were free, they began to live as if that future was already certain. This psychological fortitude had a magnetic effect on those who were neutral or undecided. Seeing a community that remained joyful and united in the face of oppression was a compelling argument in itself. It demonstrated a strength that went beyond weapons, a resilience that suggested their cause was not just righteous but destined to succeed. This carefully nurtured spirit, this unbreakable morale, could not be contained within a single group. Its very success demanded that it reach out, forming bonds with others who shared their dream of change, and building the coalitions that would ultimately tip the scales. A wealthy merchant's ledger tells a story of more than just profit and loss. On its pages, carefully hidden among the accounts for silk and spice, are entries detailing funds for printing presses and sacks of grain for striking families. This merchant had come to a profound realization that his own prosperity was threatened by the same corruption and arbitrary rule that crushed the peasant in the field. Their grievances, though experienced differently, sprang from the same root, forging alliances across the rigid lines of class, ethnicity, or religion became a master strategy, transforming isolated complaints into an undeniable force for change. These were not simple friendships, but complex political partnerships built on a foundation of shared risk. An urban guild of artisans, skilled in organization and publicity, might formally ally with a rural farming community who controlled the food supply. The artisans could provide the pamphlets and the coordinated city protests, while the farmers could enact a blockade, starving the cities of grain until their mutual demands were met. Each group brought something unique to the table, resources and skills the other lacked. The negotiations to form these bonds were delicate. A rural community, long suspicious of city dwellers, had to be convinced that the urban workers were not simply using them. A religious minority, historically persecuted by the majority, had to be assured that their rights would be protected in any new order. Trust was not given freely, it was earned through shared action. The first joint protest, the first time each group defended the other from reprisals, these were the moments that turned a tentative agreement into an unbreakable bond. Historians point out that these broad coalitions fundamentally changed the calculus of power. A ruler could easily dismiss the demands of peasants alone, framing them as a local disturbance. But when those peasants were openly supported by merchants, intellectuals, and skilled workers, the movement could no longer be ignored. It now represented a cross-section of the entire society, proving that the problem was not with a few malcontents, but with the system itself. This unity across traditional divides created a political leverage that was impossible to achieve alone. The very existence of such an alliance sent a chilling message to the ruling class that their traditional strategy of dividing and conquering the population had finally failed. How did these powerful internal coalitions then interact with the wider world beyond their borders, a world filled with other powers who were watching their struggle with keen interest? A distant empire's army marches to a foreign war, leaving its provincial garrisons nearly empty. In that newly created void, a quiet consensus forms among the people it once ruled through fear. External crises and major geopolitical shifts have always provided the most unexpected and often the most decisive openings for revolutionary change. When a ruling power becomes distracted by a foreign invasion, crippled by a natural disaster, or bankrupted by an international conflict, its grip on the daily lives of its subjects inevitably loosens. Ordinary people learn to recognize these moments of vulnerability, turning widespread calamity into a unique catalyst for their own liberation. A terrible famine could expose the government's cruel incompetence as it failed to distribute grain, shattering its legitimacy in the eyes of the starving. A costly war on a distant frontier could drain the treasury, forcing the crown to impose even more hated taxes, thereby uniting the population against a common burden. These were not opportunities born of luck, but of careful observation and strategic patience. Communities that had spent years building their covert networks and nurturing their shared identity did not see a crisis as a time to hide. They saw it as a window of opportunity they had long prepared for. Historical records from periods of imperial decline are filled with such pivotal moments. A province long neglected by a capital city focused on foreign conquests would suddenly find the courage to declare its autonomy, knowing the empire lacked the resources to immediately quell the rebellion. The very incompetence of the elites during a plague or an economic collapse became the revolution's most powerful recruiting tool, proving that the existing system could not protect its own people. This required a remarkable adaptability. A plan for a tax strike might be swiftly set aside in favor of seizing a poorly guarded armory when the garrison was suddenly called away. A network originally built to share food during a shortage could instantly pivot to coordinating a regional declaration of self-rule. The ability to pivot in a crisis, to reorganize and redirect their collective energy with speed and precision, separated successful movements from failed uprisings. They waited, they watched, and when the fortress walls showed the slightest crack, they were ready to push them open. This profound understanding of timing, of making the world's chaos work for their purpose, ensured that their hard-won victories would not be easily forgotten. The chronicler's hand trembles not from fear, but from the weight of the words he inks onto fragile paper in the cellar's dim light. His is a race against time and tyranny, a deliberate act to ensure the truth does not die with the fallen. While others fought with weapons or protests, a different kind of warrior emerged, one who fought with pen and memory to document the struggle for posterity. These archivists of the people understood that a revolution could be crushed twice, first in the streets and then in the history books, where the powerful could erase all evidence of their resistance. So they meticulously recorded everything: the names of those arrested, the speeches given in secret meetings, the specific promises broken by the regime. They hid these records in sealed jars buried beneath hearthstones, sewed them into the linings of children's clothes, or entrusted them to networks of couriers who carried the truth across borders. A diary kept by a common soldier could later provide irrefutable evidence of atrocities, transforming personal grief into a legal tool for justice. Oral testimonies were carefully memorized and passed down through families, becoming a living archive that no authority could burn or confiscate. Historical examples abound of secret caches discovered decades or even centuries later, their contents reigniting a sense of identity and purpose in new generations. These documents did more than just record events. They affirmed the legitimacy of the entire movement. They proved that this was not a mindless riot, but a conscious, organized struggle for defined ideals, fought by people with names, families, and unshakable convictions. By preserving their own narrative, ordinary people stripped their oppressors of the power to define the story. This act of documentation was the ultimate statement of faith in the future, a belief that someday someone would unearth their words and understand their sacrifice. It turned individual courage into a permanent legacy, ensuring the flame of their cause would never be fully extinguished. Yet, the very act of fighting for a righteous future often forced these same revolutionaries to confront impossible choices, where the path to a better world was paved with profound moral complexity. A community leader stares into the flickering candlelight, his hands resting on a table where two paths diverge. He can authorize a lie to protect a family from capture, an act that would save lives but betray the movement's public vow to transparency. Or he can cling to absolute truth and risk a devastating betrayal. This was the crucible of resistance, where the grand ideals of justice collided with the grim necessities of survival. Ordinary people, in their hidden meetings, grappled with profound moral questions that would define their character long after the barricades fell. Was it acceptable to steal grain from a corrupt official's warehouse to feed starving supporters? How should they treat captured informants when their own comrades had been tortured? The most haunting question of all lingered in every silence. Did a noble end ever justify a ruthless means? Historical records from secret society meetings show these debates were not abstract. They were intensely practical, often revolving around the use of deception. A network might need to create an entire fake business as a front for its operations, requiring members to live a lie every single day. While this protected the cause, it placed a heavy psychological burden on individuals and risked eroding the trust that held the community together. The treatment of opponents presented another ethical chasm. Some argued for harsh, exemplary punishment to deter further betrayal. Others insisted that showing mercy, even to enemies, was what distinguished their movement from the brutish regime they fought. A single decision could either cement their reputation as honorable liberators or brand them as just another vicious faction. The way a movement navigated these dilemmas fundamentally shaped its internal culture and its ultimate legacy. A group that collectively decided to spare a captured soldier, sending him back with a message of their principled resolve, often found that act strengthened their moral authority and attracted wider support. Conversely, a faction that chose to assassinate a moderate official who was open to dialogue might win a short-term tactical victory, but at the cost of alienating potential allies and creating lasting internal divisions. Experts who study these conflicts confirm that the most enduring movements were those that established clear, if difficult, ethical boundaries. They understood that to adopt the cruel methods of their oppressors was to become them, winning the battle but losing the soul of the revolution itself. This relentless moral navigation was the invisible architecture of a just future, but the weight of these choices carved a deep and personal toll on every individual who bore them. A family huddles in a neighbor's barn, their own home reduced to ashes by soldiers seeking to make an example of them. Their personal world has been shattered, yet their resolve remains unbroken. This is the hidden cost of revolution, the profound emotional and physical toll exacted not on faceless crowds, but on individual people. The struggle was not just fought in public squares, but within the private heart of every participant who faced imprisonment, torture, or the crushing loss of a loved one. How does a movement survive when the price of participation is everything a person holds dear? The answer was found not in solitary strength, but in the unwavering support of the community they fought for. When a breadwinner was taken to a prison cell, neighbors would quietly bring firewood and food to their family, ensuring that hardship did not turn into starvation. This network of mutual aid became a lifeline, transforming individual suffering into a collective burden to be shared. Historical records from countless movements reveal how communities developed powerful rituals to navigate this grief. The public commemoration of a martyr was not merely a funeral, it was a strategic act of remembrance. By gathering to sing songs about the fallen, by telling and retelling the story of their courage, the community transformed a single death from a demoralizing tragedy into a powerful, enduring symbol. That person's name became a rallying cry, their memory a constant reminder of what was at stake, fueling the determination of those who remained. Storytelling itself became a form of psychological survival. In the cold silence of a prison cell, a detainee might scratch a single word of hope onto the wall, a message for the next prisoner who would find it. In secret meetings, elders would share tales of past setbacks and eventual triumphs. framing their current losses not as final defeats, but as difficult chapters in a much longer story of eventual victory. This cultivation of long-term hope was essential for adapting to relentless setbacks. When a planned protest was violently broken up, the community did not simply dissolve in despair. They would regroup, often in a new location, and carefully analyze what had gone wrong. They learned to celebrate tiny, incremental victories, the release of a single prisoner, the successful hiding of a press, a single new village joining their boycott. These small wins were psychological fuel, proof that their actions mattered and that progress, however slow, was still possible. The shared purpose that had initially drawn them together became their anchor in a storm of repression. The profound belief that they were fighting not just for themselves, but for the future of their children and the dignity of their community, provided a meaning that made immense personal sacrifice endurable. This deep, communal resilience in the face of overwhelming loss forged a bond that no single act of oppression could ever break, setting the stage for those rare, pivotal moments when the tide would finally turn. A sudden death in the royal palace sends a tremor through the empire, not of grief but of possibility. In that fragile interregnum between the old king's passing and the new one's shaky grip on power, a previously disparate coalition of farmers and merchants swiftly assembles. They do not beg, they present a unified list of demands, turning a moment of political chaos into their best chance for transformation. This ability to identify and seize critical moments of opportunity separated fleeting protests from lasting revolutions. These were not random strokes of luck, but the harvest of seeds planted years before. A military defeat that drained the royal treasury, a natural disaster that exposed government incompetence, a scandal that discredited the ruling family. These were the cracks in the fortress wall that prepared movements were ready to exploit. Historical cases like the sudden collapse of authoritarian regimes reveal a consistent pattern. The commoners who stepped into the power vacuum were never truly disorganized. They were the very same people who had spent years building the covert networks, the mutual aid societies, and the shared cultural identity we have discussed. Their trust in one another was already earned, their communication channels already tested. This prior organization was the scaffolding that allowed them to construct a new reality with breathtaking speed when the old one finally crumbled. The decision-making process in these moments was a testament to that deep-seated trust. There was no time for lengthy debates in a hidden cellar. Instead, a pre-arranged signal, a single trusted messenger, or a quick gathering of local representatives could trigger a pre-planned sequence of actions. A village might declare its autonomy. A city's artisans could peacefully occupy the town hall. A network of traders might initiate a coordinated blockade of key roads. Their flexibility was their strength, allowing them to pivot from long-term resistance to immediate, decisive action. Experts who study these breakthroughs confirm they were never spontaneous explosions. They were the final, visible surge of a current that had been flowing underground for a very long time. The revolution was a marathon of patient, daily organizing, and the breakthrough moment was simply the last sprinted mile. This capacity to recognize a fleeting chance and act as one required a shared political instinct, honed through countless smaller struggles. It proved that the power of ordinary people was not just in their numbers, but in their preparedness to make chaos their ally. Yet, securing a victory in a single, brilliant moment is one thing. The far more difficult task is weaving that triumph into the enduring fabric of a new society. A crushing defeat can shatter a movement's spirit, but the true test of a revolution lies in the quiet days that follow. When a major protest is violently dispersed or a key leader is captured, despair can spread like a poison. This is when ordinary people revealed their most profound strength, not in the heat of battle, but in the patient, stubborn work of sustaining momentum through sheer fatigue and disillusionment. They understood that a single setback was not the end of the story, only a difficult chapter. To prevent their cause from fizzling out, they deliberately shifted their focus from grand, sweeping objectives to small, tangible goals that could be won. Organizing a successful food drive for the families of imprisoned comrades, for instance, was not just an act of charity. It was a strategic victory that proved their network still functioned and that their community could still care for its own. Each small success, no matter how modest, became a brick laid carefully upon the foundation of their collective hope, slowly rebuilding the morale that a major defeat had sought to crush. Historical records from prolonged struggles show how communities developed ingenious systems to combat internal division and burnout. They implemented rotating leadership, ensuring that no single person became an irreplaceable target and that fresh perspectives could constantly revitalize their strategy. This decentralized structure made the movement more resilient, as it could not be beheaded by arresting one or two figureheads. They also learned to celebrate every minor victory with intention. The safe distribution of a new pamphlet, a local merchant finally joining their boycott, the release of a single prisoner after public pressure, these moments were marked with shared meals or songs. These celebrations were not frivolous, they were essential rituals that reminded everyone why they struggled, and that their sacrifices were making a difference, however incremental. During the leanest times when direct action seemed too dangerous, the movement's energy was often redirected into cultural and economic projects. A community might start a collective garden to achieve a measure of food independence, or a group of actors might develop a new satirical play to mock their oppressors. These activities provided a vital sense of forward motion and normalcy, keeping people engaged and connected even when overt protest was impossible. This continuous engagement was a form of education in itself, teaching new members the history and values of the struggle through direct participation. Through shared rituals, whether a monthly remembrance for the fallen or a secret oath taken by new members, they cultivated a deep, emotional resilience. This unbreakable sense of community became the bedrock upon which they could endure years of repression, proving that the heart of a revolution could keep beating long after its first, loud shouts had faded. This hard-won endurance, however, forced a deeper question, as the very act of surviving for so long inevitably reshaped what they were fighting for. A rebellion that begins with a simple cry against high taxes can slowly transform into a profound demand for a voice in government. This was not a sign of indecision, but a mark of maturity. As ordinary people gained experience and built broader alliances, their understanding of what was possible and necessary for their freedom naturally deepened. They learned that a rigid, unchanging list of demands was often a path to failure. True strength lay in the ability to listen, to learn from setbacks, and to adapt their goals to a changing world. Historical cases reveal movements that started by protesting a single unjust law, only to realize that the entire legal system required reform. When new groups joined their coalition, whether urban workers or sympathetic intellectuals, they brought fresh perspectives that expanded the movement's vision. A farmer's grievance about grain prices became intertwined with an artisan's demand for political representation, forging a more powerful and inclusive platform for change. This evolution was carefully managed through democratic processes within the community itself. In their secret meetings and public assemblies, people debated not just tactics, but the very future they were fighting to build. They asked difficult questions. Was their original goal sufficient, or did a new understanding of their oppression require a more radical solution? This ongoing conversation ensured that the movement's objectives never drifted too far from the collective will of the people it served. Experts point out that this flexibility made revolutions far more sustainable. A movement that could negotiate for incremental reforms, like the right to elect local councils, built a foundation of trust and demonstrated tangible progress, even as it kept its ultimate goal of full autonomy in sight. This pragmatic approach prevented burnout and disillusionment, allowing the struggle to continue for years. It proved that staying true to core principles like justice did not mean clinging to an initial, narrow plan. It meant having the wisdom to let the dream of liberation grow and become more sophisticated, shaped by the hard-won lessons of collective action. This remarkable capacity for growth ensured that their hard-fought victories were not just fleeting moments of change, but the beginnings of a lasting new reality. A child's small hand traces the faded words carved into a monument honoring ordinary farmers and weavers. Generations after the barricades came down, the true work of the revolution began, the careful tending of its legacy to ensure the sacrifice was not in vain. This final, profound strategy was about making the extraordinary change feel ordinary, weaving the spirit of the uprising into the very fabric of daily life and law. The descendants of those first protesters did not just inherit a story, they inherited a responsibility to guard the flame. They understood that a victory could be reversed, that freedoms won could be slowly eroded unless they were cemented into the foundations of society. So they worked deliberately to institutionalize their gains, transforming the revolutionary energy of the streets into the stable architecture of a new community. Historical records reveal how these communities established annual commemorations, not as empty rituals but as living classrooms. On a specific day each year, the entire town would gather. Elders would tell the story of the broken pot or the weaver's strike, not as distant history, but as a direct explanation for the rights they now enjoyed. Children would perform plays reenacting the secret networks and the moral choices their ancestors faced, internalizing the values of solidarity and courage through participation. This active remembrance was a bulwark against forgetting. Beyond ceremony, they integrated their hard-won values into local governance. A village might establish a council where decisions were made by consensus, directly applying the democratic practices they had honed in their covert meetings. They enshrined key principles like the right to protest unjust laws or the community's ownership of common lands into local legal codes. This was the revolution moving from protest to policy, ensuring that the new norms had the force of custom and law behind them. The challenges were immense. Counter-revolutions often simmered as old elites sought to reclaim their privileges. Sometimes the movement's own ideals were co-opted, with new elites merely replacing the old while paying lip service to the cause. Vigilance was the price of permanence. Communities had to remain engaged, using the same networks built during the struggle to monitor their new leaders and hold them accountable. The most successful legacies were those that focused on education. They made sure their true history, not a sanitized official version, was taught to every child. They preserved the diaries, the songs, and the meeting minutes, turning their private archives into public treasures. This ensured that each new generation understood that their freedoms were not gifts from above, but the direct result of ordinary people's collective courage and strategic brilliance. By planting these seeds in the fertile ground of memory and law, they ensured the revolution was not a single event, but a continuing conversation, its echoes shaping reforms and inspiring new hopes for generations to come. A modern activist planning a campaign for housing justice might find unexpected wisdom in the records of a tax revolt from 1,000 years ago. She is not just studying history, she is consulting a playbook written by the most experienced strategists of all, ordinary people who have faced down power across centuries and cultures. From these countless stories of grassroots revolution, a set of universal principles emerges, lessons that transcend time and place to speak directly to anyone who seeks to make a difference today. The first and perhaps most difficult lesson is the necessity of patience. Historical change is rarely a sudden explosion. It is more often a slow, steady burn, a marathon of community building that must be run long before a single public protest is ever organized. Consider the meticulous work of those mutual aid societies and covert networks, efforts that sometimes took decades to mature into a force capable of seizing a moment of crisis. This long game requires a deep, resilient hope, one that can endure setbacks and celebrate tiny, incremental victories without losing sight of the ultimate goal. Another timeless principle is the irreplaceable value of unity across traditional divides. The successful alliance between 18th-century weavers and farmers finds its echo in the modern coalition of tenants, union members, and small business owners. The underlying dynamic is the same. Isolated grievances are weak, but a shared analysis of a common oppressor creates an undeniable political force. This unity is not a vague feeling of goodwill. It is the hard, practical work of building trust through shared action and navigating differences to find a common purpose. Experts who study social movements confirm that this pattern of strategic innovation is a constant. The secret codes woven into textiles have their modern equivalent in encrypted messaging apps. The pamphlets read aloud in taverns are the social media posts that mobilize thousands today. The core ingenuity remains, using the tools available to outmaneuver a more powerful opponent. These stories remind us that people power is not a myth. It is a demonstrable historical force that has toppled empires and rewritten constitutions. When fueled by a shared moral purpose and clever, adaptable tactics, ordinary people can overcome what seem like insurmountable odds. This historical perspective offers more than just hope. It provides practical guidance. It teaches the importance of building a culture of resistance through art and story, the strategic power of economic non-cooperation, and the moral clarity needed to navigate difficult choices. By reflecting on these universal themes, we see that the spirit of resistance is a constant thread in the human story, a testament to our enduring desire for dignity and self-determination. This broader understanding connects us to a vast lineage of quiet courage, suggesting that the most powerful tools for change may already be in our hands. History does not just live in books, it breathes in the strategies of a neighborhood association organizing a rent strike. The same principle of mutual aid that once pooled coins for a family's medical care now fuels a community fridge network, ensuring no one goes hungry in a modern city. These historical insights are not relics, they are a living toolkit for empowerment, waiting to be adapted to the challenges of today. A local group fighting for green space can draw direct inspiration from the symbolic acts of the past. Instead of planting a liberty tree, they might organize a community garden in a vacant lot, a living symbol of their claim to the land and their vision for a healthier neighborhood. This tangible act creates a shared project, builds solidarity, and makes their demand impossible to ignore, just as a powerful symbol always has. The digital world offers a revolutionary new frontier for these age-old tactics. The covert networks that once relied on merchants and coded songs now operate through encrypted messaging apps and social media groups, allowing for rapid, secure organization across vast distances. A hashtag campaign can function like a modern-day pamphlet war, spreading a unified message and mobilizing public opinion with breathtaking speed. Yet, the core challenge remains the same as it was for scribes in candlelit cellars. building trust and verifying information in a landscape filled with noise. Building broad alliances is another timeless strategy finding new life. The coalition between 18th-century weavers and farmers finds its echo in a modern partnership between tenants, local businesses, and environmental activists. They discover that a developer's plan that displaces residents also harms small shops and destroys urban ecosystems. By uniting around this shared analysis, they create a coalition far more powerful than any single group could be alone. This requires the same difficult, rewarding work of listening across differences and finding a common purpose. Experts who study social movements confirm that learning from historical successes and failures is perhaps our greatest advantage. It helps modern activists avoid the pitfalls of burnout by showing the importance of celebrating small wins. It demonstrates the critical need for rotating leadership to prevent a movement from becoming too dependent on a single voice. It teaches the value of cultural projects like community art builds or local podcasts, which sustain morale and educate new members during long campaigns. The most crucial takeaway is that people power is a proven, repeatable phenomenon. By studying how ordinary people identified leverage points in their own societies, we learn to spot them in ours. This might mean organizing a coordinated campaign of emails to a corporate board, applying economic pressure just as historical boycotts did. Or it could involve using a public forum to strategically quote a ruler's forgotten promises back to them, holding power accountable with its own words. This historical perspective transforms feeling overwhelmed into feeling strategically equipped. It reminds us that the courage to demand change is not a sudden spark, but a skill built through practice, through the daily work of building community and speaking out. The same ingenuity that turned a farmer's cart into a tool for liberation can today transform a social media feed into a platform for justice. This timeless thread connects us to every rising voice that came before, suggesting that our own efforts are part of a much longer, ongoing story of ordinary people shaping their world. A mosaic of faces from countless eras and cultures forms a single, powerful image of human progress. Each face represents a farmer, a weaver, a scribe, or a merchant whose quiet courage added one essential piece to a vast tapestry of freedom. The strategies we have explored are not isolated tricks, but the enduring patterns of this tapestry, repeated wherever ordinary people have found the will to challenge entrenched power. From the broken pot that symbolized economic despair to the secret networks that wove a web of trust, from the symbolic acts that rallied public spirit to the economic boycotts that targeted the pockets of the powerful, every action was a testament to a profound truth. History's great shifts were not simply handed down from thrones or legislative halls. They were pushed forward by the collective weight of common citizens acting in concert, their shared aspirations forging a force more potent than any royal decree. This perspective fundamentally rewrites the top-down narrative we are so often taught. It replaces a story of kings and generals with a far more democratic and hopeful vision of social transformation, one where the engine of change is the community itself. Recognizing this pattern is more than an academic exercise. It is an act of honoring a legacy. It is a way of paying respect to every forgotten soul who dared to whisper a song of defiance, who passed a hidden pamphlet, or who stood silently with their neighbors in a public square. Their collective bravery across centuries is a gift to the present, a living proof that people power is a real and repeatable phenomenon. This legacy does not belong in a museum. It is a living current of resilience and strategic genius that now flows into our own time, inviting us to consider how we might add our own voices to this unending story. These echoes from distant times are not fading whispers. They are a persistent chorus reminding us of our own potential. The profound truth woven through every story is that history's great transformations were rarely the work of a single great leader on a white horse. They were the result of persistent courage, the kind found in everyday individuals who decided that their common dream for dignity was worth any risk. From the collective storytelling around a village fire to the sophisticated economic boycotts that targeted the pockets of the powerful, these strategies form a timeless blueprint for change. They reveal that the tools of liberation are often simple, rooted in community, trust, and a shared refusal to accept injustice. This legacy is not locked in the past. It lives in the modern tenant organizing their building, in the community garden reclaiming a vacant lot, and in the digital networks mobilizing for a cause. Your own community holds this same potential for quiet revolution. Every small act of solidarity, every shared conversation about a better future, every decision to stand with your neighbors is a drop in that ever-flowing river of history. Your voice, no matter how small it may seem, contributes to its current. We would love to hear which of these historical strategies resonated most deeply with you. Was it the cunning of the covert networks, the moral power of spiritual conviction, or the quiet endurance of mutual aid? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the hidden forces that drive our world, subscribe for more. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the extraordinary power of ordinary people.